The problem with being a xenotechnician specializing in historical curiosities is that you spend most of your time cataloging alien equivalents of the pet rock. You get very good at writing reports that use words like enigmatic and ritualistic significance to describe what is, fundamentally, a weirdly shaped paperweight. But every so often, you get a call. A real one. And that's how Dave Martinez found himself standing in the center of the Galactic Union's Emergency Strategic Solutions Amphitheater, holding what looked suspiciously like a beefed-up nail gun from a 21st century construction site. Around him, beings of staggering intellect and even more staggering egos were showcasing their latest galaxy-saving toys. To his left, a floating crystalline jellyfish, Hypraxian Vlix, was demonstrating a swarm of self-replicating nanites that could deconstruct enemy allies at the molecular level. To his right, a 7-foot-tall insectoid warrior, Kthar Commander Grak, was brandishing a vibro-halberd that hummed with barely contained quantum energies. And presiding over it all, from a fluid-filled throne of judgment, was High Proctor Adjudicator Zorp. Zorp was a glyptodontian, which meant he looked like someone had tried to build a manatee out of purple jello and then given it 6 prehensile tentacles and a PhD in being condescending. His voice, when it oozed from his vocal syrinx, sounded like a bassoon being played at the bottom of a well. A very judgmental well. And finally, Zorp intoned, his gaze settling on Dave with the kind of weary disappointment usually reserved for a child who has just tried to pay for groceries with a crayon drawing. Representative of the human species, present your proposed solution to the glimmermite infestation. The glimmermites. Ah, yes. The reason for this whole dog and pony gelatinous blob show. Tiny, crystalline, spacefaring insects that were, at this very moment, eating a strategically vital communications relay the size of a small moon. The little bastards weren't just hungry, they were connoisseurs. They fed on high-energy signatures. Plasma cannons were an all-you-can-eat buffet. Disruptor fields were the dessert course. The more advanced the weapon you shot at them, the faster they multiplied, shimmering with stolen energy like a disco ball having a seizure. The assembled geniuses had proposed resonant frequencies, biological agents, and temporal stasis fields. All very clever. All very high energy. All, therefore, completely useless. And then there was Dave. He hefted his device. It was painted safety orange and had a big, chunky battery pack attached to the base. It looked profoundly, almost offensively, mundane. Right, Dave said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. So, this is the HKPFA Model 7. Stands for High Velocity Kinetic Projectile Fastener Applicator. A ripple of confusion, followed by a wave of poorly suppressed snickering, went through the amphitheater. Commander Grak's mandibles clicked in what could only be warrior-grade disbelief. Hypraxian Vlix's crystalline structure pulsed with a light pattern that translated roughly to "Are you serious right now?" Zorp's central eye stalk swiveled to focus squarely on Dave. Human Martinez. Are we to understand that you are proposing to solve a quantum-entangled, energy-assimilating crystalline swarm with a percussive fastener applicator? You can call it a rivet gun, Dave said cheerfully. And yes, that's the plan. The snickering blossomed into open laughter. It wasn't mean-spirited, not really. It was the kind of laughter you hear from a room full of theoretical physicists when someone suggests solving a dark matter equation by hitting it with a hammer. It was the laughter of beings who had forgotten that sometimes the simplest answer is the best one, especially when the problem is a bunch of stupid, shiny bugs. The core principle is simple, Dave continued, completely unfazed by the galactic brain trust giggling at him. He gestured to a crate next to his feet. The glimmerites are attracted to energy. So, we don't use energy. Or at least, not the kind they like. The HKPFA is a purely kinetic tool. It uses a compressed electromagnetic charge, very low yield, just a quick burst, to fire a small metal projectile at high speed. Zorp's tentacle gestured dismissively. You propose to shoot them? Individually? Human, there are trillions of them. The sheer inefficiency is... He searched for a sufficiently damning word. Staggering. Oh, I'm not trying to kill them, Dave said, a grin spreading across his face. This was the fun part. He reached into the crate and pulled out one of the rivets. It was a dull gray slug of metal, about the size of his thumb, but coated in a thick, viscous goo. I'm trying to annoy them. He held it up for the room's hollow displays to magnify. The audience fell silent, peering at the magnified image of a metal slug covered in gunk. This, Dave announced, is a two-part, rapid set, industrial-grade epoxy resin. The slug itself is coated in the resin, and a micro-capsule of the hardener is embedded in the tip. On impact, the capsule breaks, the two mix and… He paused for dramatic effect. You get a very, very sticky situation. Silence. Utter pin drop. What the hell is he talking about? Silence. Commander Grack was the first to break it, his voice a gravelly rumble of confusion. Your plan is to glue the star locusts together? Yep, Dave confirmed. They fly into the glob, they get stuck. Their buddies come to see what's up, they get stuck too. Pretty soon you have a big, angry, glittering ball of bugs that can't eat anything because it's glued to itself. It's not a weapon of extermination. It's a tool of extreme inconvenience. Hypraxian Vlix pulsed a confused shade of lavender. Its telepathic voice echoed in everyone's mind. The logic is insultingly primitive. Yet, it circumvents the primary energy assimilation defense vector. The sheer banality is unexpected. This, right here, was humanity's secret weapon. Not nukes, not lasers, not even our bizarre tendency to pack bond with anything that looks vaguely cute. It was our long and storied history of solving complex problems with duct tape, zip ties, and things we found in the garage. The rest of the galaxy had forgotten how to think simple. They'd evolved past hammers and nails. Humanity, bless our simple-minded hearts, still remembered that sometimes you just need to hit something, and sometimes you just need to glue it shut. Zorp, however, was not impressed. His gelatinous form quivered with indignation. This is preposterous! An affront to strategic science! You are suggesting we combat a Tier 4 infestation with what amounts to a craft project. A highly effective craft project. Dave corrected him. Look, your fancy energy weapons are their food. My rivet gun is just a rock. A very fast, very sticky rock. They have no defense against sticky rockets, not in their evolutionary playbook. This was a solid point, and you could see the gears turning in the heads of the less pompous members of the assembly. A few of the engineers in the back were nodding slowly, their faces a mixture of shame and dawning realization. They'd been trying to outthink the problem on a quantum level, while the human had just figured out how to put gum in its hair. But Zorp was having none of it. He was a creature of protocol, of peer-reviewed studies and established doctrines. The Galactic Union's Articles of War had entire volumes on the application of particle beams and gravitational weaponry. There was not a single footnote, not one measly subsection, on the strategic deployment of adhesives. The proposal is denied, Zorp declared, his voice booming with finality. It is inefficient, undignified, and lacks any theoretical framework supported by the approved literature. We will proceed with Praxian Vlix's nanite swarm, with modifications to their energy shielding. That won't work, Dave said flatly. The moment they activate the shields, the Glimmerites will swarm them. It'll be like ringing a dinner bell. Your opinion, Human Martinez, is noted and discarded, Zorp oozed. This symposium is for serious solutions. And that should have been the end of it. Dave would have packed up his rivet gun, gone back to cataloging alien spoons, and watched on the news as the Glimmerites ate the relay and then probably the rescue fleet sent to save the relay. Except for one tiny, beautiful, glorious little thing, bureaucracy. A junior analyst, a nervous-looking glyptodontian named Plix, who was clearly Zorp's nephew and had gotten the job through shameless nepotism, floated forward, a data slate held in one of his smaller, trembling tentacles. High Proctor Adjudicator, sir? Plix stammered. Zorp's eye stalk swiveled toward him. What is it, Analyst Plix? The tone suggested Plix was about to be reassigned to scrubbing the station's septic tanks. It's Regulation 17 Gamma 9, sir. Plike squeaked. The desperate times, ludicrous measures clause. You could have heard a pin drop. Then you could have heard that pin's soul leaving its tiny metal body. Zorp froze. He knew the regulation. Every bureaucrat knew it. It was the emergency brake on the train of institutional arrogance, installed after the infamous sentient fungus incident of Cycle 34, where the only thing that worked was, and I am not making this up, a giant hairdryer. Plix, gaining a sliver of confidence, continued. It states that if a Tier 4 or higher threat exists, and all conventional and theoretically sound solutions are projected to have a failure probability exceeding 90%. He swallowed nervously. Then any and all proposed alternatives, regardless of their perceived absurdity or lack of precedent, must be granted a field test. Praxian Vlix's own projections, cross-referenced with the known data on glimmermite energy assimilation, put the failure rate of its nanite swarm at approximately 97%. Zorp knew this. Everyone knew this. They were just hoping no one would bring it up. Zorp's gelatinous body seemed to deflate slightly. He was caught. Trapped by the very rules he so loved to wield against others. For a solid minute, the only sound was the gentle hum of the station's life support and the distant, psychic echo of Zorp's career flashing before his eyestalk. Finally, he spoke, his voice strained. Very well. A field test will be authorized. He said the words like they were poison. Human Martinez, you will proceed to the infested relay, DR 734. You will be accompanied by an observer and a security escort. He scanned the room, a malicious glint in his central eye. Analyst Plix, you will be the official observer. Your grasp of the regulations is clearly sharp. You will document every aspect of this endeavor. Plix went pale, which for a Glyptodontian meant turning a sort of unappetizing shade of beige. This was clearly a punishment. And for security. Zorp continued, his gaze falling on the giant insectoid warrior. Commander Grack. Ensure the human does not damage the station further with his primitive tools. Grack snapped his vibro halberd to a ready position, a gesture of grudging acceptance. His mandibles clicked. It will be an honor to witness this. Sticky Rock strategy firsthand. Should it fail, I will at least have a glorious death fighting the Star Locusts. Dave just grinned. Great! The gang's all here. When do we leave? The shuttle ride to DR 734 was, to put it mildly, awkward. It was the kind of silence you get when you put a laid-back handyman, a deeply honorable but confused warrior poet, and a terrified accountant in a small metal box and shoot them at a cosmic disaster. Grack spent the trip sharpening his halberd with a small, humming energy stone, occasionally glancing at Dave's rivet gun case with an expression that was 1 part pity, 2 parts professional contempt. To a Kthar, a weapon was an extension of the soul. It should have honor, a history, a name. Dave's weapon was named the HKPFA Model 7 and came with an instruction manual that was mostly safety warnings. Plix, meanwhile, was huddled in his seat, reviewing regulations on his data slate. He was probably looking for the proper form to fill out for death by primitive human foolishness. So, Dave said, trying to break the ice. You guys ever done any woodworking? Or built a shed? Grack paused his sharpening. I have constructed fortresses from the carapaces of my vanquished enemies. Close enough, Dave said. Plix just made a small, frightened gurgling sound. As they approached the relay, the sheer scale of the problem became apparent. DR 734 was a colossal structure, a web of dishes, antennae, and power conduits sprawling over 100 kilometers. And it was covered in a shimmering, shifting blanket of light. The glimmerites. From a distance, it was almost beautiful, like the station had been encrusted with diamonds. Up close, you could see the individual crystalline bugs, each the size of a human fist, crawling over every surface, their faceted bodies pulsing as they leached energy from the station's systems. The low hum of the relay was punctuated by a high-pitched chittering, the sound of 1,000,000,000,000 tiny mouths chewing on advanced technology. By the sacred chitin of the first brood, Grack murmured, his antennae drooping. They have consumed nearly a third of the primary array. My analysis indicates a complete structural failure in 17 standard hours. Plix added, his voice trembling. We are observing a cascade energy drain that is, well, it's not good. Right, Dave said, popping open his main case. Let's get to work. He pulled out the rivet gun, slapped the battery pack into place with a satisfying thwack, and began loading a long cartridge of the epoxy-coated slugs. Grack rested a heavy, three-fingered hand on his shoulder. Human. My honor compels me to attempt the Kthar way first. A warrior must face the swarm. It is the code. Dave shrugged. Knock yourself out. Just, try not to feed them too much. Grack nodded grimly. He strode to the airlock, his massive form silhouetted against the glittering starfield. With a warrior's cry that echoed through the shuttle's comms, he activated his vibro-halberd. It ignited with a deep, resonant hum, a low-power setting, designed for minimal energy signature. It didn't matter. The moment that hum began, a section of the glimmermite swarm on the station's hull detached like a sheet of sequins and surged toward him. It wasn't a frantic attack, it was an eager, hungry flow. Commander, your weapon's energy field is attracting them! Plix shrieked. I see that, analyst! Grack grunted, swatting at the first wave. His blade passed through them, but they weren't solid in the traditional sense. They phased slightly, absorbing the kinetic energy and the quantum vibrations. The bugs he hit just glowed brighter and began to multiply. 2 became 4, 4 became 16. Grack was no longer fighting a swarm. He was running a glimmermite daycare center. Okay, new plan! Grack yelled, deactivating his blade and retreating back into the airlock, covered in shimmering, curious bugs that were trying to nibble on his armor. The honorable combat approach is suboptimal. He spent the next 5 minutes frantically brushing the creatures off himself, while Plix tried a different tactic. According to my research, the analyst announced, deploying a small sonic emitter from the shuttle's hull. A sustained frequency of 228 kHz should disrupt their crystalline matrix without triggering a feeding response. He activated the emitter. A high-pitched whine filled the comms. The glimmerites on the hull near the shuttle paused their chewing. They tilted their little crystalline heads. Then, in unison, they began to vibrate gently, their light output turning into a pleasant, rhythmic pulse. They weren't being disrupted. They were vibing. Are they dancing? Dave asked, peering at the monitor. My device appears to be providing them with a stimulating resonant massage, Plix said, his voice flat with defeat. He deactivated the emitter. The bugs stopped pulsing and went back to eating the multi-billion credit relay. Right, Dave said, shouldering the rivet gun. My turn. He stepped up to the airlock, took a knee, and braced the tool against his shoulder. He wasn't aiming at a specific bug. He was aiming at a particularly thick patch of them on a wide, flat section of the hull. What are you doing? Plix asked, his analytical brain unable to process the sheer dumbness of the strategy. Applying a base coat, Dave said. He pulled the trigger. The gun let out a loud, industrial peachonk. There was no flash, no beam of light, just a dull thud and the barest whisper of something moving very fast. A tiny gray slug shot across the 100 meters of space and smacked squarely into the center of the bug carpet. For a second, nothing happened. The glimmerites barely seemed to notice. Grack let out a sigh that sounded like grinding rocks. Plix started prepping a new data slate, probably for the failure report. But then, a bug near the impact point tried to fly away. It couldn't. Its leg was stuck to the hull. Another bug, crawling over it, found its own leg suddenly glued to its neighbor's back. The epoxy, catalyzed by the impact, was setting almost instantly. The initial impact had splattered the resin over a meter-wide area. Now, a slow, inexorable chain reaction was beginning. A third bug, drawn by the strange, non-energetic disturbance, flew in to investigate. It landed on the growing pile of its stuck brethren and immediately became part of the sculpture. Incredible, Grack murmured. Dave grinned and fired again. Peachonk. Another sticky patch appeared a few meters away from the first. He wasn't trying to be precise. He was just making messes. He worked with a steady, practiced rhythm, the way a roofer lays down shingles. Pe-chonk. 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 Each shot created a new epicenter of sticky doom. The Glimmerites had no idea how to react. This wasn't an attack. It wasn't a threat they could consume or fight. It was just inconvenient. It was like trying to fight a puddle of tar. More and more of them were drawn to the disturbances, and the clumps grew exponentially. Small piles of a dozen bugs became glittering footballs of 100, then tangled, writhing masses of thousands. They were forming what looked like hideous, sparkling chandeliers, anchored to the station's hull. Pliax was no longer terrified. He was mesmerized, his tentacles flying over his data slate. The adhesive propagation is following a nonlinear contagion model. The rate of immobilization is increasing geometrically. He's not just removing them, he's turning them into traps for their own kind. Dave just kept shooting. He was in the zone. This was no different from framing a new wall back on Earth. Find your spot, aim, fire, repeat. He was methodically, calmly, gluing an alien plague into submission. On the bridge of the flagship, hundreds of kilometers away, High Proctor Adjudicator Zorp watched the data feeds with a growing sense of horror. It was working. The human's idiotic, primitive, undignified plan was actually working. The energy drain on the relay was stabilizing as vast swaths of the Glimmerites were taken out of commission, stuck in glittering, helpless blobs. But Zorp was a bureaucrat first and a leader second. And he saw a problem. A beautiful, regulation-sized problem. He activated the comm channel to the shuttle. His voice boomed into their helmets, dripping with righteous indignation. Human Martinez! Cease your actions immediately! Dave paused, another rivet halfway to its target. Why? It's working. It is working in a manner that is in gross violation of interspecies sanitation protocols, Zorp declared. The HKPFA Model 7, as you call it, is not destroying the lifeforms. It is merely adhering them to one another. This does not qualify as pest extermination under the Galactic Pest Control Act, subsection Epsilon. You are engaging in unlicensed, large-scale biological containment. Dave blinked. You're telling me to stop because I'm breaking the rules for how I'm not killing them? Precisely, Zorp thundered. Your tool is an adhesive applicator, not a sanctioned weapon. You are creating an unauthorized Glimmermite aggregation. You haven't filed Form 83J for non-lethal crowd control, nor have you submitted an environmental impact statement for the disposal of the resulting bug clumps. Grack's head swiveled from the screen showing the relay to the comms panel. High Proctor, with all due respect, the human is saving the station. He is saving it improperly. Zorp shot back. And that's when it got weird. Or weirder. As if on cue, one of the largest Glimmermite clumps, now the size of a small shuttle and weighing several tons, detached from the hull under its own weight. The epoxy held the bugs together, but the bugs on the bottom layer couldn't maintain their grip on the station. The massive, glittering ball of angry insects began to float slowly, pulled in by the relay's own minuscule gravity field. It was headed directly for the central communications spire. Pliax did a quick calculation. Oh dear, he squeaked. The problem has evolved. We have transitioned from a slow consumption scenario to a high-mass kinetic impact scenario. That clump will strike the spire in approximately 90 seconds, causing a catastrophic structural failure. Another, larger clump tore loose. And another. Dave's solution had worked too well. He had stopped the Glimmerites from eating the station, and had instead created a fleet of giant, sticky asteroids that were now going to beat it to death. I told you his methods were unsanctioned. Zorp's voice crackled with a sort of grim triumph. Now we face a threat that our weapons can deal with. Commander Grack, target the larger clumps with your shuttle's phaser cannons and destroy them. Negative, High Proctor. Grack barked back. If we fire on those clumps, we will energize the Glimmerites within. They will multiply exponentially inside their epoxy prisons. The clumps won't be destroyed, they'll just get bigger and angrier. Zorp was, for the first time, speechless. They were in a checkmate of their own making. They couldn't shoot the bug balls, and they couldn't let them hit the station. Dave sighed. It was the long, weary sigh of a man who just wanted to finish the job so he could have a beer. You guys are making this way more complicated than it needs to be. He turned away from the airlock and went to a different case. He flipped the latches. Grack and Plykes watched, their hopes now pinned entirely on the insane human and his box of hardware store junk. What is that? Plykes asked, his voice a whisper. Dave pulled out a new cartridge of rivets. They looked identical to the first, but they had a faint, silvery sheen. Phase 2, he said, sliding the cartridge into the rivet gun. He then pulled out a third type of rivet. These were coated in a dark, matte black material. He didn't load them. He just held one up. Okay, so, he began, talking slowly as if explaining something to a child. The problem isn't the bugs anymore. The problem is gravity. We have a bunch of big, heavy things that are falling toward another big thing. We need to make them not do that. Correct? A succinct, if terrifying, summary. Plykes agreed. Right. Now, shooting them with lasers is out. But the rivet gun is still on the table, because it's just kinetic energy. So, we need the rivets to do something other than just stick. He held up the silvery one. This one is coated with a powdered, absurdly strong, positively charged rare earth magnet. He then held up the black one. And this one is coated with the same, but negatively charged. It took a moment for the concept to land. Grack's mandibles hung open. Plykes' tentacles went rigid with dawning comprehension. You intend to? Plykes stammered. Yep, Dave said, shouldering the rivet gun now loaded with the positive charged rivets. I'm gonna play pool. With magnets. And giant balls of angry space bugs. Without another word, he turned back to the airlock and took aim. His first target wasn't one of the floating clumps. It was the relay station itself, a spot on the massive superstructure near the path of the largest bug ball. Pee-chonk. A silvery rivet shot out and embedded itself in the hull. Then he aimed at the approaching clump. Pee-chonk. A black, negatively charged rivet slammed into the mass of glittering bodies. The effect was instantaneous and deeply, deeply weird. The giant bug ball, which had been drifting inexorably toward the station, suddenly wobbled and veered to the left, as if nudged by an invisible hand. The powerful magnetic fields, one positive, one negative, were pushing each other apart. The bug ball was repelled. By the first brood's sacred egg sac, Grack breathed. Dave didn't celebrate. He was already working. He was a conductor orchestrating a bizarre magnetic symphony. Pee-chonk. A positive rivet into the station. Pee-chonk. A negative rivet into a drifting clump. He wasn't just pushing them away randomly. He was controlling them. A shot to the left side of a clump would nudge it right. A shot to the top would nudge it down. He was using the principles of orbital mechanics, magnetic repulsion, and a tool designed to stick bits of metal together to herd multi-ton asteroids of living creatures. It was the most ridiculous, most brilliant, most profoundly human thing either of the aliens had ever witnessed. They had spent their lives studying quantum physics and gravitational lensing, and this primate was saving the day with the same principle that makes novelty toys float on a desk. He fired a sequence of 3 shots into the largest clump, using the magnetic repulsion to not just push it away, but to give it a slight spin. The spin stabilized its trajectory. He was no longer just saving the station. He was putting the bug balls into a stable, controlled orbit. He is creating a planetary ring, Plykes whispered in awe. Out of glued-together space insects and magnets. One particularly stubborn clump was on a direct collision course with a delicate sensor array. There was no time to set up a proper repulsion shot. Dave thought for a second, then reloaded with 2 different rivets. He fired a positive rivet into the station, just to the right of the array. Then he fired another positive rivet into the far side of the bug clump. Instead of repelling, The clump was now attracted to the station, but pulled toward the rivet, not the array. It swung past the delicate instruments like a wrecking ball on a string, missing by meters. Then, as it passed, Dave fired a negative rivet into its near side, giving it a final, powerful shove away into deep space. It was over. The space around the relay was clear. In the distance, a new, permanent feature graced the star system, a perfect, shimmering ring of glittering bug asteroids, all held in a stable, magnetically balanced orbit around the station they had tried to eat. It was silent, beautiful, and completely absurd. For a long moment, the only sound on the comms was static. Then, Grak walked over to Dave, who was leaning against the airlock, catching his breath. The giant warrior placed a hand on the human's shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of restraint this time. It was one of profound respect. "Human Martinez," Grak said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your strategy was without honor. It was without glory. It was without precedent." He paused. "It was the most brilliant act of battle cunning I have ever seen. I would be honored to call you blood brother." Dave grinned, wiping a bit of sweat from his brow. "Sure thing, man. Just don't ask me to help you build any more fortresses out of your enemies. I'm more of a drywall and spackle kind of guy." Plix floated over, his earlier terror replaced by sheer, unadulterated hero worship. "Mr. Martinez, sir! Your application of multivector kinetic force, combined with elementary magnetic principles and adhesive chemistry, represents a paradigm shift in asymmetric problem solving. Would you consider taking on a glyptodontian in turn?" Before Dave could answer, a choked, static-filled sound came over the main comm. It was High Proctor Adjudicator Zorp. He had been watching the entire thing in stunned, horrified silence. He had seen his regulations defied, his authority subverted, and a crisis solved with a level of redneck ingenuity that his species had evolved beyond 1,000,000 years ago. The debriefing was a masterclass in bureaucratic face-saving. Zorp, now composed and radiating an aura of someone pretending they were in on the joke the whole time, stood before the assembly. The feed from the now safe relay station played on the main screen, showing the ridiculous, beautiful ring of bugs glittering in the starlight. "After a thorough review," Zorp began, his voice smooth as silk, "the Council has determined that the humans' intervention was a resounding success." He carefully avoided making eye contact with Dave, who was sitting in the front row, cleaning his rivet gun with a rag. "While unconventional," Zorp continued, "the methods employed fall under a newly created classification. The high-velocity kinetic projectile fastener applicator is henceforth to be designated as a non-lethal kinetic adhesion and magnetorelativistic displacement tool, or NLKMRDT for short." A ripple of applause went through the room. They weren't applauding Zorp. They were applauding the sheer, magnificent absurdity of it all. "Furthermore," Zorp said, turning his full attention to Dave, a strange new light in his central eye. "It wasn't condescension anymore. It was a terrifying mix of respect, fear, and avarice. Human Martinez, your species' unique approach to engineering is clearly a resource the Galactic Union has foolishly overlooked. Your archives of so-called primitive technology must contain other such marvels of devastating simplicity." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial ooze. "Tell me, what other secrets does humanity possess? What other low-tech, high-impact solutions have you been hiding from us?" Dave finished wiping down the barrel of the rivet gun. He looked up at the most powerful bureaucrat in the sector, at the assembled warriors and scientists who had laughed at him just hours before. He thought about humanity's long, glorious history of making things work with whatever was lying around. He thought about water wheels, steam engines, and the time his uncle fixed the car's radiator with a raw egg. He screwed the last piece of the rivet gun back into place, a slow, wicked grin spreading across his face. "You guys ever heard of a trebuchet?"